Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to this episode of Data as the Fourth Pillar, the Board and CXO briefing. And in today's episode, we will focus on the importance of data. When situations are not normal, you are facing disruptions. How do you handle those and the role data and context plays in such situations, right, Sid?
Absolutely.
And Sid, I think we lean upon your personal experience. So to kick it off, Sid, let's go ahead. What exactly was that situation that you faced that forms a foundation for our discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Sujay. First of all, I'm very happy to be back in Europe. Last couple of weeks has been interesting. So we've been keeping in touch, of course. So thanks for that. So basically, what happened was, I had traveled to India on a business plus personal visit a couple of weeks ago, and this was like a routine travel back, right? Like how hundreds and thousands of time we travel back, Sujay, you, me, others, from India back to Europe. I had a small 2 hour layover in Doha, Qatar, as I was flying with Qatar Airways, and things were going fine, right? This was on the 28th of February, so things were going fine. We landed from India to Doha, had a nice, comfortable stopover. The everything seemed just normal. We started flying towards Amsterdam, and I think my mind was already on how things are going to be back in Amsterdam and so on. And suddenly, I saw that the flight route that we have on the maps of the flight turned from Kuwait, right, and then did a complete 360-degree turn. And at that first moment I was thinking, maybe there is just something disruption in the flight route, so they might take a detour. Or sometimes we have even seen, if maybe there is some recalibration needed, they might probably just do a circle and then continue onwards. But then I saw it started heading backwards, and then I was starting to get worried for a second if something is wrong in the flight itself. That's when I started, luckily the flight had Starlink, so I was able to quickly Google and see that the war had just then started, and soon after that, the pilot announced it as well. We even tried to go via Saudi Arabia, but then there was again a rerouting happened, and eventually we had to land back in Doha, and I'll explain in a bit, how the following week went, because it took absolutely a week to get back safely to the Netherlands. But this was kind of the first bit of experience where there was, of course, some unexpected situations, and after that, we were just told, no, it's not safe enough. The airspaces are closed, and uh, we were given no particular further information when and if we will be able to fly. Right?
Yeah, really, really horrific. So, Sid, if you stay on that plane's situation before you landed back to Doha,
Yeah.
when the plane turned, was there a communication from the pilot as it was happening, and what was that delay, or after how much time the pilot actually communicated to you that you are returning back to Doha?
So actually, the first turn, we were all having our breakfast, so there was no communication at all. So even if people who did not notice the flight navigation, I saw many people were still doing their, either looking at some movies or something. So many people I saw didn't realize at all something is going on, and pilot also did not immediately share any information. Uh, so it was a good 10 minutes later that the pilot shared that there is some geopolitical situation. He didn't still explain the details. Of course, we all didn't know on the morning of 28th February what is the severity of the situation till few hours later. So no, it was like 10 minutes later that this was announced.
Okay. So if I put myself the hat of the pilot, I'm sure there was some communication that I would have received from the air traffic controller, and all the
Yeah.
data points were triangulated. Okay, what to do. And before to communicate to the passengers and create panic, the pilot must have all the
Yeah.
accurate information. What is the decision that has happened, right?
Correct.
And I'm sure that that's called that took that 10 minutes time. So I
Yeah.
think in such a situation, that information or the data that is passed to the passengers is very critical, that needs to be of the highest quality before it is broadcasted, right? You cannot give a wrong information. Then you mentioned about, okay, you the plane tried to enter different airspaces, right? It directly did not
Yeah,
go into Doha, right?
correct. We first entered Kuwait airspace, then we turned back, then we entered Saudi Arabia airspace. And at that time, the pilot did communicate. He said we are trying to look at alternative routes, but also he mentioned that if we look at those routes, there may not be enough fuel. Of course, then all the passengers who were strangers, we started discussing passengers. They said, "Oh, why don't we land somewhere in the interim, and maybe they can stop there and continue the journey?" So there were sometimes half information creates more, discussions, because there is more concern among passengers what's going to happen. But eventually, pilot said no. The instruction from I think the central team was to come back to Doha, and then they will figure out.
Yeah. I think, Sid, you bring a different important point that could happen in enterprise, different perspectives, right? That you and the passengers were having different perspectives. You were discussing something, and I think the pilot has a different perspective, and then the air traffic controller center who is issuing those instructions has a different perspective. But it's also curious from a data point. I was wondering, Sid, that couldn't that air traffic controller or the pilot have known that these other airspaces are already closed, and rather than trying to land into different airspaces nearby, let us just go back to Doha? What would be your thinking? I was just pondering on that point.
Yeah, you're right. The thing is, this was not a normal situation. Even if I'm sure the flight had some problem, they would have different protocols. How to handle the, when, say, like, for example, something is wrong in the engine or something is wrong. I'm sure they have different protocols for this. But I think that in this situation, since this was through different countries' airspaces, if I'm not wrong, when they started going, those airspaces were open, and then when they continued a little bit, they were given the instruction by those airspaces that you need to turn back. Right, so it's a bit. It's in this situation, I would almost call it. It's not just a data problem, because maybe they have the data saying you can take this approach, but during this process they find out maybe you have to deal with different departments, right, in an enterprise, and we didn't the central team maybe didn't know that specific enterprise's policies or processes. And only when you start going through the people involved in that, then you find out, hey, this policy is something you cannot adhere to, right? So it's almost like that. Ideally, of course, if all these silos were not there, maybe this would have been a better situation. I'm sure if it happens again, God forbid it doesn't happen again, but I'm sure they will be better prepared for this situation.
And that's more of a learning for organizations as well. Business as usual is good, fine, but there are these extraneous situations that comes up and how you are preparing for that. So, and it's not only a data, it's also about the processes that you have deployed to. Let's carry the discussion forward. Once you now landed back to Doha, what happened?
After we landed, you can imagine it's chaos. We along with thousands of passengers, we didn't know what to do. Should we continue staying in front of the gate where we were just disembarked, because maybe the flight starts after 1 or 2 hours? So many of us were still trying to understand now what is the instruction given by the ground staff there. After a couple of hours, they said no, you can go and have some food, and so they just wanted to ensure people are spread out as well as they're well fed, so they gave coupons to feed, etc. And then slowly we started realizing, maybe a good 2 3 hours later, that they were starting to now realize that this is not a situation that can be solved in a couple of hours. And by this time, the news also started that some airports in the area could be potentially targets, right? So they very soon realized that one risk leads to another risk. Now that you have so many people, in the one single airport area, so they started then going through the exercise, starting with kids and elders, to put them in different hotels. I think luckily, as I put it also on the LinkedIn post, this is where my first thought was, A, does the airways have connection with so many hotels? B, is there enough rooms for so many people? 8,000 people is not a number you are suddenly ready, right? And many of these hotels will be having occupants as well because people are already staying there. I think one important factor or data point which I heard from another fellow passenger at this point is this: they said, "Hey, this should maybe a problem, but should not be a huge problem because Qatar had the football World Cup. So at that time they had prepared for a really big scale, and true to that point, very soon I wouldn't say very soon, the end to end, including the flight, I think we were stuck for a good 15 hours or something. And this is where again, an important thing is not to forget some protocols, right? So even when we did all of this in a very evacuation situation, still the airport had us go through immigrations because we needed to enter the city. So they went through immigrations for people who did not have visas, for example, because you were just transiting, and you needed a visa. They immediately gave like a few days of visa, and so on. So they went through still the processes, which I felt was very good. uh, so just not you evacuate ignoring all your processes, but you still collect the relevant information, go through the protocols. Of course, we did not have our bags because they didn't want to go through the whole process of providing 8,000 people. There may be something like 20,000 at least bags that will be out there checked in. So they just said, no, you just go to the hotels. So this was kind of the next phase, where I think the from a data perspective, this is where, as I put also in the LinkedIn piece, this is where I think the enterprise is, it's important to also have data about your business partners, right? So in this case, the hotels are like business partners. It's not an easy exercise just to say 8,000 people, how do I allocate them in hotels, what is the occupancy, without having a robust data set up with your business partners where you can easily find out how to allocate the people.
Mhm. And Sid, before even going there, I think I read your post. You talked about this household unification you did. You were traveling on
Yeah,
a different PNR on a corporate visit, and
yeah,
your family was. So what happened there, Sid?
that was a good it's a good reminder, Sujay. So what happened was, I had booked my travel using my employer because I was on a business visit, and I had used a different booking for my family, so my wife and son. So but if you think of the normal route, I had made sure we just booked the seats next to each other. But now that we had the situation, in a couple of hours, once I realized that we are not going to fly on the same day, my first thought was, the bags, each of the bags are also tied with a particular booking reference. So I had uh, a total of 3 bags, and one of them was on my booking and two of them were in the other booking. And then the other problem was, as they were trying to prioritize, the first, they were looking at families with kids, and they, if you look at the data itself, they would just look at the booking of my wife and son because they see that that booking has a kid, right? So they started prioritizing that. At that point, I went and approached one of the staff members there and explained, this is the situation, I have booked a different thing, but we are a family and the bags are like this. So I think what was important that happened is, I think they did some process. I didn't exactly look what they did in the backend, but they somehow tied those two booking reference to the same, either the same booking reference or some kind of same master data, so that the rest of the experience, whether it's providing us a common hotel room, rerouting the bags, later as we go through the story, rebooking us back, at no time we I had the concern that, oh, they'll do it differently for my family and differently for me, right? So that was the experience.
So I think that I was reflecting on that. So that was a systemic solution that they did, that downstream you did not face any issue.
Correct.
So I'm just assuming, I don't work at Qatar Airways. I am assuming they have built that master data management system and the entire data operating model, if I may say so, to
Yes.
build in that context, the additional context that you provided, they could capture in that system, and all their downstream processes which are consuming that information could do that, right? It did not break down the line. So
Correct.
that's a positive tick mark on what Qatar Airways did, and it also then highlights that importance of additional context that comes in
Yeah.
as part of a process execution, the ability to capture that, and then the ability to share that across not only one process, there are multiple processes involved here
Yeah.
for you to the bags, the hotels, for you to return back. You never face that challenge downstream, right?
No, very important point indeed, Sujay. So, I mean, of course, they might have done this more from a positive situation, right? Giving a good customer experience. Maybe they are capturing also using our membership about what preferences we have, etc. But if you see now that same data has been very useful also in such a negative slash a risk situation as well. So I think the data important is how you use the data. Of course, they might have initially built this process for better customer experience, but in a way this is also customer experience, but for a negative situation, which was very good to see.
Yeah, exactly. And those extra context that comes up, the you need to have that ability to capture that and use that. And I think this is an example I see of the context that is needs must be captured, and
Correct.
context becomes so much more important as well and valuable.
Correct.
Great. I think that is one learning for enterprises I wanted to bring up in citing this use case or example that you presented.
No,
Great. Let's move on. So
just to add there,
yeah,
Sujay, sorry to interject.
yeah, no
From
problem.
our book as well, I think there's an important learning, right? Of course, we have emphasized a lot in our data as the fourth pillar book about capturing demand. But in this case, or in these situations as we are seeing, sometimes the demand is not exactly known. So sometimes in these situations as well, data has a compounding value, because even this demand was not foreseen by airlines or in any way, but still the having the right data and the right people processes, as we have discussed, is has been very critical.
Yeah, and again, if you lean on that point, Sid, we talk about the supply and the demand, and it's not only in this scenario or any scenario, there needs to be an agility of the supply organization to able to cater to that impromptu or unplanned demand that comes in, right?
Correct.
So you cannot be just rigidly designed yourself to the present known demand. There is this unknown situations happen, and the supply has to be capable to cater to that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I think let's move on. So I think then again with the hotel side, like you said, all the partner information, but that accuracy of information as to what hotel has what available capacity so that they could assign you that hotel. I think that's another critical data infrastructure that has been built,
Yeah.
assuming, like you said, the World Cup 2022 operational readiness. So thankfully, Qatar Airlines has it, and you could benefit from that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but also the data sharing between them was good. I'm not saying that, in such situation, people had a very seamless experience. Of course, you had to go in, there were queues. I mean, imagine that you had to arrange a safe, like buses, etc. You don't want people to just carry their own Ubers or go in such situation, because the local authorities didn't want people at this point to be just going out in the open. So they had to also come up with certain processes which they had to think of on the fly, I believe, but which may have caused maybe a few minutes or hours delay, but still the priority was safety and ensuring people all get allocated to the hotels, right? So this was kind of the next part of the story. Then what happened was, one day turned into two, two into three, three into four, actually. The good thing was, during this whole period, the people who were kept in the hotels were not completely kept in the dark. The first thing after the first day went by, we were told by the airlines as well as from the hotel. So they both shared a common message that our stay is taken care of, because we are stuck in transit, and they even uh, provided us with meals in the hotel, etc. And they after a couple of days, of course, you can imagine many different people will be stuck with many different situations. So we soon found out, maybe a lady stuck with four kids, away from her husband, or someone is stuck alone with a spouse or girlfriend being away. So they will start getting much more you know uh, anxious about the whole situation, just because it's the indefinity of when we will be able to fly back. Some of us were more rational, understanding what is going on. But this is where the airlines realized after a couple of days that different people will have different questions. So they started allocating some of their staff members to go to each of these hotels, because they are spread across the city, and then mainly going there to answer questions, ensure they are being well taken care of by the hotels as well, also answering any questions that the hotel has. So of course this is a process and a people part, but from the learnings, I would say this can also help the enterprise collect data for such situations. So for example, the next time they could understand what are the hotels doing, for example, so which how they should better improve the situation for hotels, maybe have more options for, I'm just making it up, right? So if they know there should be more options for continental menus or vegetarian options, and so they can be better prepared with the hotels. They could also look at how they could have better infrastructure in the hotels, for example, because if people are not allowed to go out, can there be some group activities to keep people motivated, etc. But also for the airlines, they can collect a lot more data about which customers are in which situation, and how they can maybe in the future compensate them or help them, etc. Or prioritize them as things needs to be moved out, right? So this was the situation. I mean, to conclude, I would say in this phase, at least I was happy that I had every day someone I can go and talk to from an airline's perspective, because you have hundreds of questions at this point, right? What is the plan? How are they going to safely get us out? Is it through land first, or is it through flights opening up? What are they thinking of, etc. So of course they all didn't have all the answers every time, but at least it was good to see them representing the airlines.
And yeah, I think this is an example of enterprises where you need to deploy these empathy and try to capture the context, more important, right? I'm sure Qatar Airways did not have a dashboard which was showing that this hotel had a high stress index of passengers, so let's send more people there. But it's a good food for thought or insight for a CXO audience, I would say. How do you institutionalize this capture of context across your organization, all this qualitative information and knowledge that's float across, and then how do you then route it to decision makers so as to improve your business operations or customer experience throughout, right?
Absolutely, it's in these times of crisis, where the right actions may create lifelong customers, or may create customers who will never ever be connected or associated with the enterprise. So I think it's an even more important data point and an action point than during a status quo situation, because in a status quo situation you may not create that big spectrum of impact, positively or negatively.
Yeah, it certainly highlights the importance of context beyond the traditional business as usual data, right? Which you are programmed to, and challenge for organizations how you are agile enough and flexible enough to handle that and capture that and make decisions. And then, Sid, reading onto your note, there was another interesting thing that when you got this call to go back to the or your flight, then there were some stranded passengers who were not on the bus, and your wife tried to help get those people onto the bus. What exactly happened there?
So the first thing is, till so this was 28, so I think till a good 6 days later we were all still in the wild. What's happening? There were some discussions, could we go to a different country, like Saudi Arabia or something, and then fly from there. But I think at this point the central team of Qatar Airways probably was still trying to figure out how to safely get the airspace open. What happened after that was a bit of a whirlwind. So on the early morning, so this was like a 3 a.m. On the Saturday morning, we got a call in our room, and suddenly we were told by hotel and the airlines that they have arranged a rescue flight for us, and since we had a child with us, they prioritized us. So when we went down, we found out that there were multiple such people who were with us. But they, at this point, I think maybe it was because of the rapidness of the decision, because I heard from Qatar Airways that even they got to know of this maybe like 1 hour before. So they had, I think they were just trying to do their best to prioritize, but maybe they did not have all the context and the data. So this is where, for example, my, as I said in the post, my wife identified a few people she had met over the week who were probably even more urgently needing to go back than even us. So she tried to fill in with those data, and sometimes we didn't have the information because, for example, we didn't know the full name of a person because we may have met them, on a meal. You only know their some of their first names, and then when we say the first name, the hotel people, since you have a very short window, they are not able to identify exactly who this is. And at 3 a.m., imagine you're not going to call every person in every room and figure this out. So, but at least from an empathy standpoint, we tried our best to identify at least which floor they are on. Sometimes we have seen them, come out from that lift in that floor. So then my wife said, okay, I think they are in that part of the hotel, and we tried to find out, right? So a good learning is sometimes when all the data is still not there, at least if you know the empathy and the context of the situation, uh, you can do your best with your other information and the other people to find out the missing information.
Yeah, and how I see it, Sid, it's not just, yeah, as you said, when the data is missing, there are other parts of the pillar, right? It's the people, process, and technology. So herein, your wife became that person who could help fill in the context. And it also does points out to some data silos that might have existed, because I'm sure all the passenger manifest is with Qatar Airways or any airline, and the hotel booking has been done. And maybe when it's more like a reverse logistics things, right? You
Right.
had that process installed when the hotel rooms had to be given, but when the extraction was there, that team or that part of the process did not have that information, right, on their fingertips, or automated as well, to quickly look up which person is going to which destination, for
Exactly.
whom those flights are arranged, and they are in which room.
Exactly.
So I see that could be an example of a silo, that one process has it, but the another process does not have it, right? And
Correct.
that's where human beings step up to fill in that gap.
Yeah, and as you rightly said, I mean, maybe the if you think it from our data operating model perspective, they might have the data operating model built within the airline itself, and they might have some master data about the hotels, but the information about the data back in the hotels, like who's in which room numbers and how they are allocated, and in the time of crisis, how you can easily tap into that information. The information is there, but in a short amount of time, where again comes to the speed part of our conversation, how can you effectively get the information back? Actually, in this situation, I should also say, and we'll move on the story, but just to call it out a little bit, if you look at it purely from a data perspective, maybe then we should not have even got the call, because when you'll find out in the later part of the story, they didn't even want the people of certain locations. So I think they were just doing it a little bit on a gut basis slash information they partially had on the data.
Exactly. So no, it's a good example for enterprises where you have a very robust data operating model for working for one business process,
Correct.
but another business process is not hooked onto it, right? You are not part of that demand for that data operating model process, and you are totally executing in a different manner than that business process. So not only in this your example, I think it's a good learning that these situations in practicality does exist in organizations.
And maybe one more aspect to add in is, I think this is where the process or the governance process behind it may need to be quickly revisited, because I can imagine in a normal situation maybe the hotel does not want to give the room number to the airline because it's maybe violation of a privacy that the hotel has about which person is in which room number, maybe potentially like a data privacy violation. So it makes sense in a normal situation you are not having this, but when this particular crisis happened, there should be the right knowledge to understand, hey, in this situation that information, even though it's sensitive is very important, because the next decision we have to take is going to require this, right? So that foresight and information that I need to tweak a particular governance rule may be very important as well for a board to, or a C-suite to take.
Yeah, because governance is in the context of the business purpose, right? For a normal business purpose, you do not need to share. That's the government's policy. But if the purpose here is totally different, and then the governance rules needs to also align. I totally agree, Sid. That's really good. Yeah, let's move on, Sid. So what happened
So
then?
then we got on the bus early morning again, and then when we went there, we are told, they have planned 5 rescue flights to different destination. If I remember, London, Paris, Madrid, Frankfurt, and Rome. So this was the 5 destinations. We went into the check-in counters. Now this airport, which is massive, looks so quiet with only maybe I don't know the exact number, but I assume if there were only 5 flights maximum, maybe 1,000 or 1,000 plus passengers out of the 8,000 were in this first day of the rescue, right? So when we went there, we were immediately told that, hey, but your original flight was to the Netherlands. There is no flight to Netherlands. You have to go back to hotel. Now if you can imagine from a customer experience, they have been woken up at 3 a.m. They went through a huge emotional thing, because you are thinking, okay, after being stuck for 1 week, you are going to finally probably go back home, and then you arrive at a check-in counter with young family, and then you're told, hey, you have to go all the way back. So of course they were following instructions purely maybe from a data standpoint, but understanding this at this point how customer may feel. So this is again going back to the point, right? I even had a few seconds where I thought, okay, I'm never flying with this airline ever again, because I don't want this situation to come across, right? But luckily what happened, I didn't immediately go back to the hotel. Not just me, I saw some other people who were, so it's not like a single data error. I saw some other families in the same situation, so we were just sitting in the waiting area behind the check-in counters, and I was trying to walk around trying to figure out, and I saw one of the ladies came up to me from the airlines and asked me, because I was kind of walking back and forth, what is going on. So then I explained the situation, and this is where, as I put in the LinkedIn post, she immediately saw me and my family and said, okay, just tell where you want to go, and we'll make it happen. And then they put me, but also put some others who were stuck. I don't know for sure if everyone who was in the waiting got through, but at least they prioritized. I think this is where, if they have a bit of context, because I later reflected it, I knew that some people, because it became 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, took a personal route to just go on their own, because I heard a couple of days before in the hotel that some people took their own vehicle and tried to go to Saudi Arabia and catch their own flight. Plus, the other context they missed was they did not, even for the original flights, they had only prioritized the families with kids or the older people, right? So if they had the context of the data, they should have realized that the flight was not going to be fully booked, because you are not bringing all the people who originally were intended in that flight, and some of the people would have flown or taken a different option, etc. So that understanding may have prevented this situation where we had to first go and then be told, no, sorry, your data says you are not part of this flight, and then they had us look up, and even as I said in the LinkedIn post, they even gave us seats next to each other. So it was not at all like, there was only seats in the three ends of the flight, and they gave that. I was even ready for that. So I think little bit of course empathy again comes back here, which the lady showed, uh, but having the right context was, I think, also a little bit, of course it was again all very fast decision making had to be done, but better context would have helped in this situation, I feel.
How I see it, Sid, is that, this is a good example of an AI agent being deployed. If you see that junior staff who told you will not get onto this flight, she or that person was just following that instructions and just executing a very rule-based scenario that, okay, this flight goes to Frankfurt, this person's original ticket was not Frankfurt, hence this person cannot be onboarded, right?
Right.
So that's how many times AI agents also gets built. So more of a learning for organizations, and then this additional person came in who provided that contextual override with the justification. So that's where human comes into. It's important, again, a learning of humans being in the loop in when agents execution happens, but also a learning that how you are able to capture that context and able to execute this. As you said, you at moment thought that you will never fly through that airline. That negative moment of experience could have been prevented if at that booking desk itself they were empowered to capture the context and then execute based on that additional context, that you are a family which is passengers, child stranded so much, and you are open to go. And not only you are open, the airline should also figure out, hey, this flight is going to Frankfurt, this is a per family originally destined to
Correct.
Amsterdam, let them be taken onto this flight. And maybe that's one of the reason someone who gave you that call at 3 a.m. thought that, right?
Yes.
And that decision was not passed on to this person who was checking you in. So that's another gap that I foresee. And that's very important learning for organizations, how you break down silos, different operating processes, and how you are able to bring in that context capture and execution based on that at every step of your execution, just at not at one step. And nevertheless, be also be prepared to have human in the loop to
Yes.
provide that additional context when these programmatic AI agents miss those.
A very important point. And what you just said now, Sujay, reflected me on our conversation we had with Binny Gill, where he said very important for humans to document the processes or thought processes, right? So to your point, if the airways staff who called us in the first place had a mechanism they could document the reason they have chosen these passengers, and that information was seamlessly readable by the agent or by the people in the airport, this confusion would have been completely avoided. So that would have made it much more easier. I mean, even more seamless would have been. Of course, it's hindsight is great, but even more seamless would have been they could even map exact seating for every people based on the prioritization they have done, and only reached out to them and ensured the right prioritization was done. Because the others who could have just kept sleeping, of course they would be then informed as well, like how you have in a normal operations, you have zones, right? You have zone 1 to 5, whatever it is. If you knew your zone, even the people who didn't go on the flight that day, if they were told that you are next in the list, they know that okay, now in the next rescue operation may be happening that evening or the next day, they are in the priority, right? So that information for the other people as well, because I am only speaking from my perspective and I was able to get out of the first batch. But I can imagine if you woke up on the next day morning and you saw suddenly many people in your hotel have left, who were stranded passengers, but you are still there, you will have a lot of questions. Okay, when will airlines prioritize me? Why they did not choose me today, right? So the that context should also be given to the other people left in that 8,000 or now 7,000, whatever the number.
Yeah, and I think now, Sid, as we look towards trying to summarize this discussion and capture our key takeaways as we have been discussing, and even bring in for the context of the boards and CXOs for whom this podcast is for, what I understand and what we have been talking, this importance of context is so very critical for execution of your business and take it to the next level. And that's a key focus areas that boards and CXOs should have. That it's not only about the raw data, that the data that exists in the business processes, there's the context that floats across execution of the process in the technology, in the people, and that needs to be fed back. And that's a critical challenge, whether your data operating model is systematically prepared to do those execution of context, right?
No, absolutely. And that context can then empower people to take the right decisions, right? I mean, again, to reflect, I think the airlines and the whole operations in the situation we were in did a great job. So I'm very thankful, as I put in the post as well. But if they were fed with more context, to your point, Sujay, they would have been even able to take even more better decision, which would have made even those small glitches that I talked about in this journey, even more seamless, right? So that's learning for every enterprise.
Yeah, and learning also is that in the present situation, as we see in the world order, these uncertainties are increasing for organizations. Most cases they are facing supply chain
Right.
disruptions,
Right.
right? And these in these situations, with taking your examples, I think that's a food for thought for enterprises. Are they prepared to execute their business process in this uncertain world? And for that, that importance of context becomes the key differentiator for them.
Absolutely. Fully agree.
Cool. I think that was a good discussion, Sid. I'm really happy that you were back. And so, as the different passengers who have made their way back to their homes, it has been a stressful time.
Yeah.
And but every stressful times like this brings in some learning experiences. That's the whole objective of this podcast, to glean through those learning experiences and try to share that with our listeners and viewers.
Absolutely.
Great, then. Thank you for everyone who has joined today. We look forward to you joining us again in the next episode of this podcast. And another reminder, if anyone of you personally or someone that you know of, has strong perspectives on data, is at the board and the CXO level, and would like to share his or her perspective through this platform, we are happy to have a discussion with you. Our contact information is in the podcast notes. So please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Bye bye.